Now, WNBA legend Sue Bird has entered the chat with a perspective so clear, so logical, it stops all arguments in their tracks. Her take on Clark's legacy doesn't just challenge ESPN's rankings, it completely dismantles them. The greatest WNBA point guard ever just settled the Caitlin Clark debate with one brilliant insight that nobody saw coming. Because ESPN had a list that they sold around Caitlin Clark's name but then took her out of the top 5, and now Sue Bird has weighed in saying you have to have Clark at least top 3 because who would you pick on your team, not to mention her accolades. Now, you don't have to have her first, of course, and it's incredibly impressive what, say, Brianna Stewart did, winning 4 championships at UConn, or what Cheryl Miller did in her day, but there are plenty of late Diana Taurasi, so many on the list, right? But at the same time, Caitlin Clark elevated Iowa. When ESPN released their list of the greatest women's college basketball players of all time, basketball fans everywhere were stunned to see Caitlin Clark missing from the top 5. Their justification? She never won a championship. That's it. That's their entire argument. And Clark broke the all-time scoring record, led the country in points and assists, and obviously passes the eye test, not to mention the impact test. So, I think you can argue her as number 1, but it's really tough to just dismiss her and take her off the list, and I think the lack of the championship is the only thing anybody can latch onto. But let's be real for a moment. Caitlin Clark's resume speaks volumes. She's the all-time leading scorer in NCAA Division I basketball, not just women's basketball, but all of NCAA Division I. She shattered 3-point records, assist records, and her Iowa Hawkeyes made back-to-back championship game appearances despite not having a roster packed with McDonald's All-Americans. Yet somehow, ESPN decided that without a championship ring, Clark's unprecedented individual achievements aren't enough. It's a take so cold it could freeze the sun. I think when I really look at lists like this, it's kind of like, do you go based on just resume, or do you go based on if we had a draft, who would you take? And there's no way you're not taking Caitlin Clark in the top 5. And to me, there's no way you're not taking her in the top 3. So, and that's not, a knock on anybody else. I just think that's the reality of it. Enter Sue Bird, 4-time WNBA champion, 5-time Olympic gold medalist, and widely considered one of the greatest point guards to ever play the game. When Sue Bird speaks about basketball, the basketball world listens. And what she just said about Caitlin Clark has changed the entire conversation. In a clip that's now going viral, Bird completely reframed how we should evaluate greatness in college basketball. Let me share exactly what she said. Just to touch on the Caitlin Clark of it all, I think the way that I'm looking at this, no, Caitlin didn't win, it's why she's not number 1. I think going to the national championship game 2 years in a row, basically playing big in every big game, hitting every big shot in every big moment, there's something to that. Clearly raising the level of your teams, there's something to that. This kid is obviously special, definitely one of the greatest of all time. But then Sue Bird dropped her mic drop moment. I think when I really look at lists like this, it's kind of like, do you go based on just resume, or do you go based on if we had a draft, who would you take? And there's no way you're not taking Caitlin Clark in the top 5. And to me, there's no way you're not taking her in the top 3. So that's not, a knock on anybody else. I just think that's the reality of it. This perspective is brilliant because it cuts through all the noise. Sue Bird just introduced the ultimate litmus test for greatness. If you were drafting the best college players of all time, would you take Caitlin Clark in your top 5, in your top 3? The answer is an unequivocal yes. Think about what this means. Bird isn't disregarding championships, she acknowledges Clark isn't number 1 without one, but she's adding crucial context that ESPN completely missed. Greatness isn't just measured in trophies. Bird's draft test is genius, because it forces us to evaluate players based on their actual impact and ability, not just team accomplishments. Basketball is a team sport played with 5 people on the court. Even the greatest player can't win championships alone. Clark took a team with limited talent compared to powerhouses like UConn, South Carolina, and LSU, and still managed to reach consecutive championship games. Let's be honest, if Caitlin Clark had played for Dawn Staley at South Carolina or Gino Auriemma at UConn with their pipeline of 5-star recruits, we'd probably be talking about multiple championships, but she chose to stay in her home state and transform the Iowa program instead. What makes Bird's take so powerful is that it comes from someone who knows what it takes to win at the highest level. She's not some random commentator or social media personality. Sue Bird has championships at every level. She has Olympic gold medals. She knows exactly what greatness looks like. And she's saying unequivocally that Caitlin Clark is undeniably top 5, probably top 3. Now let's take Bird's test and apply it practically. Imagine you're drafting the 5 greatest college players of all time. Are you really leaving Caitlin Clark off that list? Let's consider who else might be in the conversation. Breanna Stewart won 4 championships at UConn and was named Final Four Most Outstanding Player each time, an unprecedented achievement. She's undoubtedly on the list. Cheryl Miller revolutionized women's basketball at USC, winning 2 championships and 3 Naismith Player of the Year awards. She's a lock. Diana Taurasi led UConn to 3 consecutive championships and was named the Naismith Player of the Year in 2003. She's in the conversation. Chamique Holdsclaw won 3 consecutive championships at Tennessee and was a 2-time Naismith Player of the Year. She belongs in the discussion. Maya Moore won 2 championships at UConn and collected 3 Wade Trophy awards as the best player in women's college basketball. She's a contender. These players all have championship pedigrees and individual accolades. But here's where Bird's perspective becomes so valuable. If you had to draft 5 players in their college prime, would you really take all of them over Caitlin Clark? Clark's offensive versatility is unprecedented. Her ability to score from anywhere on the court, her court vision, her passing ability, and her clutch performance make her a transformative talent. She didn't just put up numbers, she changed how women's college basketball is played, watched, and appreciated. The ESPN list, which seems to weigh championships as the ultimate measure of greatness, misses this crucial point. It's why their take has drawn so much criticism from fans, analysts, and now legends like Sue Bird. ESPN's criteria begs the question, is a role player on a championship team greater than a transcendent superstar who falls just short? Of course not. We don't consider Robert Horry's 7 NBA championships greater than Charles Barkley's 0 championships. We don't rank Derek Fisher 5 NBA championships above Allen Iverson's 0 championships. Individual greatness and team success are related but distinct. Bird understands this. ESPN apparently does not. What's particularly puzzling about ESPN's stance is the inconsistency. They've never applied this rigid championship or bust criteria to men's basketball. Pete Maravich never made it past the first round of the NCAA tournament, yet he's routinely included in discussions of the greatest college players ever because his individual brilliance was undeniable. The same standard should apply to Caitlin Clark. Let's also talk about Clark's impact beyond statistics. She has transformed the entire landscape of women's basketball. Attendance records, television ratings, social media engagement, all have skyrocketed because of Clark. The championship game between Iowa and South Carolina drew 18.7 million viewers, surpassing most NBA games and even some NFL playoff matchups. While championships weren't part of Bird's direct argument, it's worth noting that impact is another crucial measure of greatness, and by that measure Clark stands alone. No player in women's college basketball history has done more to elevate the profile and popularity of the sport. Even South Carolina head coach Dawn Staley, who defeated Clark's Iowa team in the championship game, acknowledged Clark's transcendent impact. You can't really put into words what Caitlin has done for our game. She's transcended it. She's brought in people that never really watched women's basketball. When the coach who prevented Clark from winning a championship recognizes her transcendent impact, perhaps ESPN should take note. This brings us back to Sue Bird's brilliant perspective. The draft test cuts through all the noise, all the metrics, all the subjective criteria, and asks a simple question. If talent is the measure, is Caitlin Clark one of the 5 best, one of the 3 best? Bird says yes, and it's hard to disagree. What makes Bird's take so refreshing is that it doesn't diminish the accomplishments of other great players. She's not saying championships don't matter. She's not claiming Clark is definitively the greatest ever. She's simply saying that by any reasonable measure, Clark belongs in the top 5, likely the top 3. The reaction to Bird's comments has been overwhelmingly positive. Fans and analysts alike have praised her for bringing clarity to a debate that had become increasingly tribal and divisive. Her perspective resonates because it feels honest, balanced, and rooted in basketball knowledge. As Bird put it, that's not a knock on anybody else. I just think that's the reality of it. The simplicity of the draft test is what makes it so effective. It forces us to be honest about talent, impact, and greatness without getting lost in the weeds of specific criteria or subjective rankings. So let's pose the question directly to ESPN and anyone else who would leave Clark off their top 5 list. If you were drafting the 5 greatest college basketball players of all time, in their prime, would you really pass on Caitlin Clark? Would you really let her fall outside the top 5? The honest answer, the only answer, is no. you would pick her, just as Sue Bird would, and that alone settles the debate. Clark's legacy at Iowa goes beyond her individual statistics, though those are staggering. She averaged 31.6 points, 7.4 rebounds, and 8.9 assists in her senior season. She became the first Division I player, man or woman, to record over 3,000 points and 1,000 assists in a career. More importantly, she transformed a program that had never reached a Final Four into a national championship contender. She elevated her teammates, making everyone around her better. She performed at her best in the biggest moments, like her 41-point triple-double against Louisville in the Elite Eight. These achievements don't disappear because South Carolina and LSU had more talented rosters and won the final games. Clark's greatness isn't diminished by the fact that basketball is a team sport. What Sue Bird has done with her simple but profound perspective is remind us what greatness really looks like. It's not just about the hardware, it's about the impact, the ability, the transformative talent. It's about asking yourself, if I could choose any college player in their prime, would Caitlin Clark be on my short list? The answer is yes, and that's why ESPN's list fails the basic test of basketball common sense. Bird's perspective also highlights another important point. The greatest players raise their teams beyond what their talent level suggests is possible. Clark took Iowa to consecutive national championship games despite being consistently outmatched in terms of raw talent. She elevated her team through her play, her leadership, and her competitive fire. That's what the truly great ones do. They don't just compile impressive statistics. They make everything and everyone around them better. They change the game. They set new standards. They inspire future generations. By every one of these measures, Caitlin Clark is indisputably one of the greatest college basketball players ever. She belongs in the top 5. She probably belongs in the top 3. Sue Bird sees it. Basketball fans see it. The only ones who don't seem to see it are the folks at ESPN who crafted their list with a flawed premise. As Bird concluded, this isn't about disrespecting other great players. It's simply about acknowledging the reality that's right in front of us. Caitlin Clark's college career was historically great by any reasonable measure, so the next time someone tries to argue that Clark doesn't belong among the all-time greats because she never won a championship, just pose Sue Bird's simple question. If you were drafting the 5 greatest college players ever, would you really pass on Caitlin Clark? The answer settles the debate. Sue Bird just changed the game again. Not on the court, but in how we measure greatness. Her perfect take on Caitlin Clark doesn't just end the debate, it reframes it entirely. If you're drafting the greatest college players ever, Clark isn't just on your list, she's near the top. End of story. If you enjoyed this breakdown, smash that like button and subscribe for more sports analysis that cuts through the noise. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you take Caitlin Clark in your all-time draft? See you in the next video.